exciting episode of 3D Politics, an extended version. Tom E. McKay right here with Rex Lawhorn, my fine guest. You can see why it took us 6 months to get you on, how hard it is to load it.
A lot of technical.
Rex Lawhorn, gubernatorial candidate for Oklahoma governor last time around, 2018. And he has been kind enough to drive in all the way from wherever he comes from. Where are you driving in from?
Poteau, Oklahoma.
Poteau, Oklahoma, just to sit with me to explain where I am wrong or right about the Libertarian philosophies. We're going to talk tonight about the goals of the Libertarian Party, government, free market economy, ideals and principles, ideals versus principles,
right.
And the general philosophies between those two concepts, the definition of freedom, primacy of individual rights, the 10th Amendment, the libertarian style utopia, and about force, where it applies to abortion. Now, I'll tell you how I initially got involved. I have a love-hate relationship with the Libertarian Party. I came about learning about it 1999, 2000, Harry Brown talking about the definition of individual rights. And I grew up in a household that was invaded and destroyed by feminism, progressive liberalism, and abortion was just a thing women did. But it was the libertarian philosophy as described in 1999 that made me realize, well, you can't just kill a person even if they're living inside your womb, which brought me to this great understanding as far as I was concerned about individual rights. And so just before we get to those bigger issues of abortion, I've seen now the Libertarian Party, I feel like, is not representing itself in a way that is consistent with individual rights, but is delivering a package that is popular, more like a Marxist or a socialist delivery. So tell me about the libertarian goals where it applies to changing the behavior of man. It says in there they want to abolish fraud, etc., in the platform.
Force, fraud, and coercion. It wants to remove force, fraud, and coercion from all contracts, all arrangements between individuals, whether it be a company and a company or you and I swapping a goat for a sheep for our farms or whatever.
Right.
The goal of the Libertarian Party overall is to see a world set free in our lifetime. That's their stated purpose, their stated direction. And a lot of different people have a lot of different priorities, but ultimately what that comes down to is the fact that each individual person owns themselves and the fruits of their labor and everything that is an extension thereof. And they want to see a world where the government doesn't interfere with that.
And yet, how do you get there? How do you enforce a libertarian existence when you have things like the non-force impact, or what was
the non-aggression
non-aggression pact? Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's simply relating to the initiation of force, fraud, or coercion. And that doesn't say anything about the defense from. Because, I mean, if we're going to be perfectly honest about everything, there are always going to be bad actors. There are always going to be individuals who seek, through force or intimidation or some other manner, to impose their will on another or restrict the rights of another individual. And there's nothing in the libertarian movement that prevents you from defending yourself from that action, whether it be through word or force.
And again, there's everything kind of cross references for me, so I don't want to make the mistake of jumping ahead in what I'm trying to say, because
it's a spider web.
Yeah, the idea that to banish it states in the LP platform nationally, and I don't mean to hold you to that necessarily. It's a subjective routine, and I want to learn from you as opposed to hold you to something. But this is one of the problems I have with the platform. This is one of the problems I have with the platform, is it says in the platform it wants to banish fraud, and that is a desire to shape the future mankind as opposed to recognizing truths that are evident.
True, but the thing that we also have to recognize is the fact that the Libertarian Party is a political party, so that the focus of the Libertarian Party is dealing through government action, through electoral politics. So when it's talking about banning fraud, it's merely suggesting that that is one of the things that it would be okay. It's a place where the government is permitted to interfere in the personal relationships between two individuals. Is when there is fraud, the government is allowed to prevent that or to seek redress of grievances.
So to me, that's no epiphany. I mean, there's already laws.
Right.
Okay, so it's not to me. Okay, all right.
It's like the Constitution. It specifically limits. The amendments are meant to limit the government, and our platform is suggesting what those limitations should or could be.
And we have a constitutional document that limits our federal government already.
It's true.
Okay. And so I guess the problem that I have with the National Libertarian Platform states clearly fraud must be banished. Force and fraud must be banished from human relationships. Here is the suggestion that the government should be involved in human relationships where fraud and force is going to be banished. And we already have laws to protect us against that.
Well, we do, but at the same time, how good has our government been in the last 100 years at maintaining the principles of the Constitution and its original intentions? For instance, we have things like Obamacare. We have tax rates that are way over the roof. Our forefathers, the people who drafted that document, went to war over a 3% luxury tax.
Right.
And now we have American citizens in the middle class and lower at a marginal tax rate of over 50%. And that's...
The overtaxation, you and I are going to find a ton of agreement in the capitalistic understanding of the overreach of government. I think... So you agree, though, this is a libertarian concept. There must be some force in place to govern this fraud and such.
True.
And so what you're suggesting is what we have right now is not correct under either the Republican or the Democrat.
That's correct.
And the libertarian force would be different how?
Because, so, at the end of the day, everybody is looking for the same thing. We all want freedom. We all want personal liberty. The Republicans have a focus where they want to have personal liberty, such as, traditionally they want businesses to be free to conduct as they see fit. But they're not so cool on the social side. The Democrats, their focus is on social liberty. You should be able to be gay and be married. You should be able to ingest whatever you wish to into your body. But at the same time, on the business side, as we can see with the modern Bernie-crat, that they want to impose severe economic restrictions and interfere with you getting the fruits of your labor. The Libertarian Party takes the best of both sides of those, and they have the consistent idea of liberty across both the economic and the social platform.
Wouldn't to enact the goals of the Libertarian Party require it to be global or universal to start out? It seems like me there's no incremental way to suddenly be like, well, Oklahoma will be libertarian, and then how will that interact with all the other states?
Right.
And then well, what if all of America were libertarian, and how is that going to work with all the other countries? And this is one of the problems with the goals as stated nationally. It seems to be Marxist in its global attitude. That is, it requires global control for the whole idea to work.
Well, it's actually quite the contrary of it. The platform is designed around protecting the smallest minority, which is the individual. So if Oklahoma is libertarian and the rest of them, the rest of the world is not, say they go full Marxist, full communist or whatever.
Right.
Oklahoma would, and you will see in the national platform that we believe in maintaining a sufficient military for the defense of our nation, or if it were Oklahoma's case, Oklahoma would maintain a sufficient defense for, as much as they could against the rest of the world. So again,
it's a subject. The concept is to the ideal concept is to be rid of all unnecessary force.
Correct.
And then we recognize, though, that the term unnecessary is totally subjective.
In a lot of cases, yes, but there are also lines which, even the common person can draw regardless of their political affiliation. Like, it's not okay to just walk up to somebody in the street and punch them in the face, right? I mean, I think that's something that we can all agree on.
Right, but it gets stickier if they live inside a womb, because we are allowing for the children that live inside wombs to be ripped apart and aborted, which we're going to get to
I
that.
started to say, do you want to jump into
we're
that
not
one
going to
now,
jump
or
to
are we
that
going
because
to
we want
hold
them
it?
to stay tuned. But I mean, the point
Okay.
is, this is the lack of consistency in the Libertarian Party, if you ask me. Unnecessary force is subjective. When you say members of society, that is subjective. Not all the people are included in the definition of members when you say members.
Well, in the traditional sense, the way things are done right now, that is correct. But, you know, and we're going to be talking about ideals versus principles later on. In the ideal world, society would be nothing more, and it would be understood as by everyone as nothing more than a collection of individuals. And individual liberty would be where the respect was given, as opposed to right now the collectivism, say the left versus right, or authoritarian versus libertarian, so on and so forth, etc. Instead of putting everybody in boxes and collectivizing, it would be an association of individuals, and free association would reign.
According to the Republican platform, it is an association of individuals. It defends the right of individuals. The first 10 amendments are a protection of the individual rights. It's codified into law. There's no new concept of defending the individual.
And that's not entirely accurate, because if we look at the Republican platform, they also, in many places at the local, state, and national level, all say, for instance, restricting the rights of gay individuals to marry. Or, as we will get into later, talking about banning abortion through the government, as opposed to finding a free market solution for it. So there are places in the Republican platform where they do collectivize individuals and suggest that they should have less rights than their other citizens based off of a single trait about them.
There is a problem in the federal government, state and local, of recognizing rights according to groups, which they don't. The rights are not assigned to groups.
They shouldn't be, but they are.
That's one of the problems. If the Libertarian Party is supporting concepts of group rights, then that's a problem for me right there.
And you will hear me have arguments about that with my fellow libertarians all the time, is that we should not be supporting any group's rights. We should be supporting equal rights for every individual, regardless of what group you want to affiliate with.
I agree with that.
So every individual has the right to be married. Every individual has the right to bear arms. Every individual has the right to self-autonomy.
And I agree with that. And we'll, I don't have it on there, but hopefully we'll get to it, marriage. And it comes down to definition of marriage. Because when you say marriage, you're assuming that, you know, your definition of a marriage. And there are, I guess, apparently other definitions of marriage.
Very true. Yes.
And so we'll move on to the government and the free market economy. Now, one of my problems with the idea of the unrestricted free market is kind of like the idea that there are no absolute truths. The only problem with the idea that there are no absolute truths is you got to accept one overarching absolute truth, and that there are no more other absolute truths. And so this is the problem with the absolutely, you know, restriction-free market. There's no such thing.
It's true. And if you notice, the Libertarian Party seeks to eliminate force, fraud, and coercion. So even they are not talking about a completely unfettered market. You know, what a lot of people like to say is capitalism run wild, or
crony capitalism.
Yeah, that sort of thing.
Yeah, corporate welfare.
Right.
Otherwise,
that's all force, fraud, and coercion in some form or another. And the Libertarian Party believes that shouldn't exist.
And so this is not novel. We already have laws in place according to the U.S. Constitution.
And again, we see situations every single day where both sides of the aisle like to ignore those laws and like to ignore those principles and still engage in those practices. We can see it all the way to the highest level of the land.
Right. And so why aren't your efforts to correct those parties, as opposed to spend your time essentially espousing the ideals that are already upheld by the Republican Party in statute but not in action?
Because the Republican Party is inherently flawed in that it seeks to use government force as its course of action, which is what the problem is to begin with. The fact that these government officials have all this power, they have the ability to initiate these laws that are extra constitutional, as you and I both agree,
Right.
and are able to enforce those on society as a whole, despite the fact that it is against the platform and it's against their stated ideals. I believe that that's human nature. You know, human nature, if they are given power, they are going to try to wield that power to what they see as the most favorable outcome. And inevitably, that's going to be infringing on other people's rights. So rather than using the government to create those situations, they want to remove the power from the government so that's never a problem to begin with.
But
Because most of these problems can be solved by free market solutions, by individuals acting together, or as individuals even, to remove the problems that exist with the large government and the power of government.
but the idea that government uses force is axiomatic to the definition of what government is. There is, you have admitted, there is no libertarian government that will not exist, that will exist without force. There will also be force in the libertarian government, and it will be totally subjective according to the libertarian leaders at that time as to whether they're using it necessarily or not. And so there's no guarantee that just being libertarian will make them above any other party based on some moral conviction.
But this is where we go back to the ideal versus principles discussion. In the ideal world, one of the things that I like to say so often is that the president should be so weak that you don't even know his name. You don't care who he is. Same with the governor, same with your legislature. If they do not have that power over your daily life to interfere with your individual liberties, what difference does it make what they want or what they think, because they don't have the power to enact it and to force it on you? It's more the monopoly of force that tends to be the problem than just having the power itself.
And
itself.
And you think that adding a third party maybe decreases or increases governmental intrusion in your life?
It will decrease by far, because
Okay.
it will be much harder to get things done. So
you agree with a bicameral system then that essentially it has built-in gridlock?
it should be a workable system if you don't have two parties. where
Workable,
one
what do you
person-
mean?
Theoretically, you know, our forefathers, many of them warned us steadfastly to not get involved into the party system, and that a two-party system, or that political parties, you know, that they're inherently evil, that they inherently cause government to fail. Because what it does is it allows two groups to collectivize, and it allows the tyranny of the majority. The pendulum swings back and forth. The Republicans will be in there and they'll have power for 2 years, and then they'll have executive power for another 6 years. And then the pendulum swings the other way. The Democrats will have total power for 2 years, and then they'll have the executive authority for another 6 years. So what we in essence have is we have 2 years of an extreme side that is able to push through anything they want to. Hashtag Obamacare, hashtag Patriot Act. And then we'll have 6 years of relative gridlock and stalemate, like we're in the middle with Trump right now, where they're throwing up this garbage impeachment and all of these other things in order to just stalemate the government, where they don't get anything done. And the more that you can create that stalemate, that means the more you're going to have a consensus required to get things done if you have more than a two-party system. Because a two-party system, one of them is always
Let
going
me
to be
just
a majority.
couch this in the idea of government getting more stuff done, to me, is a bad idea.
That's correct.
Because, so you advocate, though, for government getting more done, though, is what you're saying.
No, I advocate for the government only doing what they have a consensus to accomplish.
Okay,
And
but
when
we
you have
know-
a two-party system, you have a majority, which means that one extreme version is always going to have the power to push their agenda through. And that is not what our government was intended to do. It was intended to be a consensus-based government.
Well, I disagree with that. But, yeah, I think it was built for gridlock on purpose, bicameral on purpose, according to Montesquieu. And the study of the Roman history, and our founding fathers designed our system to be bicameral so that we wouldn't have primarily a one side or primarily this side, so that primarily each tyrant would fight with the other tyrant and leave most of our plebes alone.
And it's also the reason that we have a three-branch government, is because even if one went rogue, the other two had an opportunity to check the third.
So So, there is no such thing as a free market economy, correct?
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
the
there's,
ideal, but it would be
what I'm saying is,
impossible.
even in a perfect libertarian world, the libertarians are going to protect against fraud through force.
Through defense. Force, the initiation of force is very different from defense.
Can you defend through enforcement?
No, you cannot. Because enforcement is taken after the fact. The only goal of enforcement is to punish. And that's not, libertarians believe in restorative justice over punitive justice. So in a libertarian society, the force that you are talking about is force after the fact in defense of another. So it would, for instance, be this harm happened, this is what it's going to take for this person to be made whole, and it would have to be restorative. So they would be forcing this individual to retract the damage that they did. As opposed to saying, it is wrong for you to do this, so we're going to make a ton of laws, such as prohibition.
So again, there's we already have tort laws, etc., for all these things in the weeds. I mean, all of these tort laws for fraud and etc., and banishment of bad people and all that stuff is already figured out.
And yet
you just don't. You have like a policy difference with the way they're doing it, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
yeah.
so this is now set free in our lifetime means very simply that we want to see the rights of individual become paramount. Now, in my concept, I'm almost jumping here. In the primacy of individuals was made paramount with the 10 Amendments and the Constitution. That was the year that they made it prime, and that's our
intention.
And that is our law today. And if you are working against that, no, right? You're working in favor or against the Constitution?
In favor of a modified Constitution. But if that were true, if what you just said is true, that those 10 amendments are our law, then why did we have over 50% of our people in jail 2 years ago for victimless crimes where they hurt no other individual?
We have all sorts of regulations for the road that people disobey, and it can happen. We don't just abandon and restructure all the roads. I mean, we're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. We have a system that codifies into law already with bipartisan agreement. And, okay, so let's talk about ideals versus principles. And this is one of the biggest problems I think I have with what is, I think, a Marxist packaging of utopian idealism in the Libertarian Party.
Okay, you're going to have to unpack that for me for a little bit because I've never heard it described that way before.
Well, let me see if I can find a quick note here. I'm sorry. To carry the concept to an extreme, that is libertarianism, the idea, first of all, is that to set everyone free in our lifetime. Now, again, this idea of being free, I know it sounds to you like a Monty Python sketch. Too much peril, I know the scene. But still, remember the Emancipation Proclamation, and a lot of the slaves at the time, I remember, I wish Van was here. Remember you were there. That's the old joke.
That's for you, David.
Yeah, there you go. A lot of the slaves at the time were like, well, we're not leaving. This is where we live. Yes, we have a symbiotic relationship with our slave owner. Was ideal from today's understanding of slaves are a bad thing, but there were certain situations where the slaves and the slaves' owners were not at odds, and so the Emancipation Proclamation was a failure in certain senses because the Negroes didn't go running, to use the appropriate term for 1865, didn't go running to the North. And they thought it would create havoc in the South, but it didn't really send them all running because there was a definition of freedom, according to the people in the North, that didn't fit the definition of freedom for the slaves in the South. So this idea that freedom is some sort of universally understood.
So the difference between pre-Emancipation Proclamation and after is that they had the choice. And that's all we're asking for, is that people have the choice, that they own the rights to their own labor, They own their own life, and they own their opportunity to seek happiness through whatever measure they seem necessary, as long as they aren't interfering with anybody else's right to do the same.
And so we have that already in law.
Do we?
Don't women own their own body? Don't you own the fruits of your own labor?
No, I do not.
Well, how can you argue how much you're overtaxed if you don't own a portion of it?
It's very simple. If I don't own all of it, then I am a slave. It's a simple idea.
Well,
if someone can forcibly remove you from society, put you in jail, confiscate everything you own because you didn't pay a tax, then that is not done through voluntary means. That does not mean that I own the fruits to my labor. We don't even own the land that we live on. That's, deeded to us from the state because they hold it in perpetuity. So, I mean, the idea that we actually do own the fruits of our labor is ridiculous, because there are even many jobs that you're not allowed to do. If you wanted to raise hemp, or if you wanted to weave hemp clothes, 3 years ago in the state of Oklahoma, it was a felony. You would go to jail for 25 years.
That is not a universal indictment of total lack of ownership. If you are going to be equivocal and comparative, then you can easily compare that what you do own in America is a hell of a lot better owned here than it is in Africa.
Well, if you notice, our platform doesn't say an America set free in our lifetime. It says a world set free. We recognize that everywhere, all around the world, that people are under some form of oppression. And yes, in the United States, we have it magnitudes better than most people in the world. But that doesn't change the fact that we still aren't there.
So you have just expressed part of the problem I have with the libertarian mindset, really.
Okay.
It's global. You have a globalist mentality.
We have an individualist mentality.
But the only way it works is if it's applied once you own the world. You have to be global before your theory before you will even accept that your theory is good. Because
well, see, that begs the question, because that makes the assumption that the libertarians want to own the world. And there is a running joke in the party, is here to take over the world to leave you alone. And that's not entirely accurate, because it can be done on an individualist basis in a localized area if you maintain sufficient defense to keep despots from coming in to try to take you over.
And you're only going to wait until the despot makes his move to use your defense of force
to repel them,
to stop him.
Correct.
So you'll allow the attack to come. You'll never go on the offensive.
Right. That's the initiation of
Okay.
force, and that's wrong.
Okay. And so the rights of in my opinion, the rights of the individual became paramount before the span of our lives. September 25th, 1789. Are you suggesting as a libertarian that the Bill of Rights and the U.S. Constitution are somehow less than in vogue with today's world? Because these are similar, if you are, the communist goals in 63, discredit the American Constitution by calling it inadequate, old-fashioned, out of step with modern needs, a hindrance to cooperation between nations on a worldwide basis. When you talk globalism, it sounds like Marxism to me.
I can understand why you think that, but there is a difference in the fact that, Marxism is predicated on the idea that there is a single owner, there is a single entity that is the overriding authority for the judicial distribution of resources. And that is 100% contrary to the philosophy of libertarianism. It's the idea that the government cannot and does not own anything, no centralized planning or authority. Even within our party itself, they have a concept that they call bottom unity that I don't necessarily subscribe to, but it's the idea that the entire political party is formulated from the ground up, that the individual, that the member, is the ultimate authority, and the chair is just a figurehead with no real power. So
it sounds like the American system where the people, run a government that they self-govern.
do you really feel that way? Do
Again,
you really
this
feel that we are represented?
You're arguing gradient scale in the weeds of my personal experience. And I'm talking about the philosophy of the document. There's no benefit for me to switch over to the libertarian written version of protecting human individual rights when I
see.
already have a constitutional document that's been working for 200 and some odd, and you guys are coming up with this Marxist global utopia that if we just put the right people in, if we man the government with all the libertarians, man, it'll all roll, because you really can't, there's no way to discourage a good libertarian.
I
Well,
see what
it's
you're talking
ridiculous. We already you have offered nothing that the libertarians say that's any different than what we already have. And when I press you on the globalist thing, you say, well, it's not anything like Marxist. Well, of course it's not, because it's capitalist and it's all about individual freedom.
Right.
Thing, you say, well, it's not anything like Marxist. Well, of course it's not, because it's capitalist and it's all about individual freedom.
Right.
So why package it like a Marxist?
Because of the society. It's a communication message. Like you said, this isn't an LP 101 thing, so we're getting into more of the operations side of it now. And I see what you're talking about. When you're talking about the ideals, like, yeah, we've already got all these documents in place and everything that are supposed to do everything that you say you want to see happen. But again, remember, we're talking about a political party, and a platform is nothing more than a statement of ideals of a party, right? A perfect world. So if you view as what we are packaging as a perfect world as something that's already espoused, then it's not a matter of putting the right people in the office. It's a matter of removing the power from the office that was not authorized under the Constitution, which will take the right individuals.
I will say that having just in order to be ready for this conversation tonight, having read the 66 pages of the Republican National Committee platform from 2016, it is not utopian promises of what the world will be. It is a historical, hooked-in 66-page document referencing certain acts that need to be encouraged, certain support against other acts. When I read the Libertarian Party thing, it sounds like what high schoolers would put together. And when it gets to abortion, it's like, oh, well, it's a tough one. We'll let it slide. But the 10th Amendment in the Bill of Rights, ratified concurrently with the U.S. Constitution, states, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. Between the 9th and 10th Amendment, the libertarians should have everything they want, because they're not proposing anarchy.
Should. But now, to be fair, there is a sizable contingent of the Libertarian Party that does propose anarchy. As a matter of fact,
it's another problem. Then they're not libertarians, right?
I would argue that they do not fall under the Libertarian Party ideals. And there is a problem within the Libertarian Party where their favorite thing is the purity test, right? You're not a real libertarian. You're not a real libertarian. We've seen a lot of that here in Oklahoma.
I've heard of it, yeah.
Right. So, I'm reluctant to say that, no, they're not really libertarians, because we are the closest of the political parties that they would be able to match. So if they chose to be political activists, they would naturally gravitate here, because we're all on the same train moving the same direction, less government. And we are the only party that proposes that.
Actually, the Republican Party proposes that in their platform. And you can sit there and tell me they're not doing a good job, but I'll tell you, the Libertarians are doing less of a good job.
Well, we're not even there.
Okay, so the Republicans are not only protecting my personal private rights, my individual rights, but they also are proposing to for the states, because if my federal government doesn't force the states to do stuff, they're telling the states, encouraging the states to divest themselves of the publicly held lands.
Yes.
Say in the Republican platform, Donald Trump's platform is to encourage the states to diverge themselves of all the federally owned public lands. And so you should agree with the idea that the federal government should be owning land, right?
That they should not
be owning land.
Correct.
Okay. This is in the Republican Party platform, which is well on its way further than all of the libertarian things you propose that are already in the Constitution. I wish you would become a Republican so I could get you to help me.
I was a Republican for almost 20 years.
Well, let's try again, because we got a new brand.
Yeah, the brand that just pardoned a man who was selling Senate seats.
There's no way to turn a giant ship moving through the water all of a sudden like a hovercraft. It takes a slow turn of events.
You will get no
and
argument from me out of that.
Are you seeing any draining of the swamp happening in the last 3
No.
years? You don't like anything that's happened in the last 3 years?
No, that's not true. I believe that removing us from the Paris Accords, I believe that renegotiating the trade deals on foreign policy, I believe those were all good things.
Good.
Where they wound up, I do not, because the trade deals again became restrictive. They became more in our favor, yes, but again, it went just as far away from a free market economy as you could go, because once again, it restricts everything. It puts tariffs and taxation on select products, which doesn't do anything. We're the ones that ultimately have to pay for all of that.
We elected him to choose that, okay, as a group.
Well,
I mean,
you know,
we have a
roughly
system of a republic of
25%.
democracy. He's not a dictator. People elected him. We suffered Obama's tyranny, and we're suffering this one.
Yes.
Montesquieu knew there would be tyrants in charge of the government.
Yes.
That's why the bicameral system is preferable.
Yeah, Bastiat.
Here we go.
It.
Okay.
Hayek predicted it. Mises predicted it.
So we all know this, and the idea that they're infringing on some free market, we already said earlier, there's no such thing as a free market.
Right.
Okay, so these
it's
arguments fall
impossible.
flat to me. Explain to me the Libertarian Party style utopia. How does it become not a party now or not a thing now? And through elections, does it win the state, and then does it go national? How does it work?
It's a difficult thing to discuss because, you know, you've seen the political quadrants, right? There's 4 quadrants. And then the upper left, what we typically call the Democrats, and then the authoritarian right, which we typically call the Republicans.
Okay.
Down below that center line are the libertarians, and there are left libertarians, and there are right libertarians, and there are centrist libertarians, there are pragmatists, there are radicals, there are anarchists, there are audacious.
They are below, just for separation sake time. Notice them are below because they are less controlled than the other, from a government standpoint. I mean, are they just there to delineate below? Could they be above? Are they below for a symbolic reason?
It's not that they're symbolic. It's the fact that the further up the scale you are, the more authoritarian you are.
Okay,
and
so they're below because
line,
they're less authoritarian.
Right. They want less government control.
Okay, I'm understanding this.
So, but then there is a segment of our party that calls themselves libertarian socialists. And what they want is the freedom to form a commune voluntarily between themselves where nobody owns anything and it's all collective ownership. But they want to enter into that voluntarily, which makes them libertarian, which is a concept that I have a lot of difficulty with, and I would never be part of that community. But at the same time, you know, that's why it makes it very difficult to talk about the libertarian ideal, because the libertarian utopia would just be the ability for everybody to choose the manner in which they live their life.
And before you get too far down, the people, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
the people that you just described, this group that
libertarian
want to
socialists.
go this thing, aren't they free to do that? Are they not free to do that anyway right now?
No, not really, because, well, like we were talking about earlier, you can't own your land. You do not have the right for
because you have to pay property tax, right?
Oh, you have the right to, you have to pay property tax, but you also have usage requirements. There are zoning laws, and there are all sorts of things that make it very difficult for certain types of communities to navigate, such as a socialist community, where, you know, they may not want to be addressed and to be on the E911. You know, there are hundreds of tiny ways that the government interferes with the way that you use your property. You can't raise chickens in certain city limits. There are tons of reasons, and there are tons of ways that they can do it. And while I may understand the problems that the laws are trying to solve, what they do is they prevent an individual from choosing to dispossess the fruits of their labor. They aren't allowed to determine how their labor is used.
You know, I used to have a problem with property tax, and again with the Montesquieu, that Montesquieu said that property tax is the amount of our wealth we pay to protect the rest of our wealth. Okay, and this is a Montesquieu thing. So
Yeah.
I understand that if you're going to live in an area that boundaries other human beings, then it's going to cost you via zoning and etc. because you are acquiescing to living with other individuals. So I mean, if
Okay.
you lived on your own island all by yourself, none of this would be a problem.
If there was no government.
There would, if you were all by yourself, you'd be the government. There's
Yes.
always a government.
Right.
Okay, so again, the libertarian concept to me is invalid the way it's packaged because A, we already have it, and B, it's utopian, which is literally Greek meaning non-existent. I mean, it doesn't exist, and
Let me give you a personal example. I moved down to Poto, but I actually am planning on building a house on top of a mountain out in the middle of nowhere. I don't even have public road access, right? It is 4 miles to the nearest county road.
a perfect libertarian.
Yes.
That's good.
I just had my property taxes raised 2,000% in 1 year because they changed the usage. Without notification, without consent, without inspection, which is in violation of state
All
law.
right. Okay. And
So-
I like that. I mean, I get that. I like it. I want to try to draw an analogy. That's why I'm getting lost for a second, because that's a great analogy. You have this. You're out there
Yes.
trying to be by yourself as much as you can. They still raise your taxes. Now,
Yes.
at the end of the calculation of numbers, what hurts is the end result of the number, right?
Well, it's the process that hurts, and that's why libertarians are so stringent on enforcing individual liberty and not collectivizing rights. It's because it's not the fact that that bottom line hurts. It's not the fact that that extra $300 was a shock or a surprise.
Right.
The fact is the government had the power to do it. And if they have the power to do that, they have the power to do anything. They can do the same with your car. They can do the same. They can put in a clothing tax. They can put in a food tax. They can do this. They can do that. They can do other things.
I see your answer, and I was going for another defense, and that is the fact that what they're doing is wrong. Is the immorality of their action is because it's wrong. It's not because of $300.
Right.
It's not the money. And it's not all of the other inconveniences. It's the fact that they have the power and they don't have to do that.
Right.
But they do it punishingly anyway.
They do it
It's
because
cruel
they can
and
against the
unusual.
law.
Yes.
I mean, once we went in and
clearly-
talked to them, we went and reviewed the books. It's been policy there for them to do that forever. And they didn't even realize that what they were doing is against the law. It says right in the Oklahoma tax code that if you are going to change the usage, it requires a physical inspection. They never went out and inspected the land, and it's just been coursed that if it's under 20 acres, they are going to change the usage upon sale. That
I want to tune everybody back. I've been so enthralled with the discussion, I forgot to tell everybody what we're doing. Tom E. McKay, right here for a special edition of 3D Politics with Rex Lawhorn, former gubernatorial candidate right here in Oklahoma on the Libertarian ticket. And I want to thank you for coming out. And I'm going to also ask you, because you're a great brain with a great thinker, similar to this concept of what is wrong with the equation, and let's apply it to the race concept. Many people in the black community, they say they're infringing on a black person, and what's wrong is that they're infringing on a black person. And I'm saying that's not what's wrong. What's wrong is that they are damaging a human being, first of all. And what they're doing is wrong. It's not wrong because they're black. It's wrong because what they're doing is immoral, and they're damaging a human, regardless of shape, form, or color. Is that accurate?
absolutely right. There are people in the Oklahoma Libertarian Party that have told me that I am not a libertarian because I don't subscribe to the idea that we should be collectivizing rights. There were a lot of people that were in favor of the Black Lives Matter, and I recognize the problem with that. I mean, they are disproportionately affected by the criminal justice system. They are disproportionately killed by law enforcement. The government disproportionately affects black people, but that's not because they should not be getting those rights because they are black. They should be getting those rights because they are an equal human being endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So,
which sounds Republican to me. I don't know why you're a libertarian.
it sounds constitutional to me. But
Well, I encourage you to read the platform of the Republican Party and see how much of it you might agree with. It's
I
not an
glanced
easy
over it in
read.
2016 to prepare for the gubernatorial race.
It is not an easy read,
Right.
but it is certainly not a glossary. It doesn't just slide through there.
Well, I know we didn't want to get into a defense of the Republican platform on this, but maybe in a future
Well,
show
we
we
gotta-
can come in and talk about
I
that.
would, because also what you just said, I think that there is data back to the race thing. I think there's data that argues against your statement that they're disproportionately treated, that the African Americans are disproportionately treated by the criminal justice system.
Well, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. So
It's true that Roy. It's
yeah.
Roy Rogers said that. Yeah. Rex, I appreciate you coming out, and hopefully we can do this again, because I always have loved the Libertarian Party. I hate how it's being packaged now. To me, I feel like the Libertarian Party was essentially packaged within the first 10 amendments, protected by the utopian libertarian government you'd want, as long as we get good people in government. All these individual rights will be protected better. It's never going to be a perfect system, as I think we agree on that.
Right.
But once again, thanks to Rex Lawhorn, David Van, 3D Politics for having us out here. You can always catch me at Tom E. McKay on Twitter. And thanks again for coming out this evening.